This is
Assalamu
Barebactrian.
alaikum and welcome back to Barebactrian. If you're watching this on X, welcome to Basilian Thought, where we're going to be, fleshing out some of the Basilian takes, some of the Basil takes, some of Basilian anti-leftism. Because after, 3 or 4 years of doing this, I think it's about time that we really collect these thoughts across the timelines. Shout out to all of the Basil accounts gone before. This is not Basil's account, of course. This is an account created and run by my off-screen producer. So good on getting this one. Um, but we are going to be hosting some articles and we're going to be hosting some clips on this feed that is owned and operated by my off-screen producer for whom this is their first account. But yeah, I want this to be a place to kind of talk about uh, the Basil takes without necessarily engaging in the media market itself. I'm really excited about it. And to kick us off, I decided to, well, actually, first, before we get into Basilian anti-leftism number one, I'd like to remind everyone that the merch shop is still open. Check out barebactrian.com to get yourself your British women's cricket t-shirt, your one of the good ones sweatshirt, your not gay tank, your basil leaf hat, tank top, shirt, hoodie. I mean, we got it all there. So yeah, check out barebactrian.com and of course check out barebactrian on patreon.com/barebactrian. Um, but let's get into it. So as certain notable figures have said recently, what we're going to be seeing is a lot of infighting amongst the people who hold themselves out to be anti-left, right? We're going to be seeing a lot of infighting between the Bronze Age Barry Weisses of the world and the James Lindsay anti-woke rightists of the world and the Ashley St. Clair Laurel, the Ashley St. Clair type of woman TM take sellers and the broader right, as we saw with Lauren Southern with the 19th Amendment kerfuffle earlier at some point last year. We're gonna be seeing a lot of this, right? So I figured for our first essay, well, the first thing that we should do is kind of get to basics, right? As any Basil enjoyer knows, I don't hold myself out as telling white men what to do ever, right? I'm not here to offer you a positive vision. I'm here to be anti-left first and foremost, and I kind of wanted to hammer that down in this first essay and what I mean when I refer to the left, what I mean when I say to be anti-left, right? Because it's so often confused with things like being quote unquote right wing and being a social conservative or believing in God. Believing in God's a great thing. You should do it. But I am not a social conservative. I don't consider myself a right winger, which we'll get into why I don't, because of course, left and right refer to left liberalism and right liberalism. And I consider myself illiberal. I consider myself an anti-left Marxist. I'm also Muslim. These things are incompatible with liberalism. Um, so I don't belong in Europe. But that being said, I wanted to use this first essay to kind of just lay some groundwork. What is the left, right? And the way I frame this is, the way I frame this to the people I see myself in political coalition with, whether they are social conservatives, whether they consider themselves right wingers, etc., is to say there's a boot on your neck. Okay, everyone feels it. It's the reason why so many of us come online in the first place. It's because we feel stifled by the mainstream discourse, especially over the past several years, so better part of a decade, and we found ourselves in a place where we felt that we couldn't speak freely about the things that we were observing, especially during COVID. Um, and we were looking for a place where we could do that, right? So we felt that boot on our neck kind of constraining our ability to express ourselves and also threatening to kick us out of the institutions. Because I mean, a lot of you are losers, and not you, of course, not Basel enjoyers, but a lot of people in the dissident right or the dissident media market microcosm. All of these concepts we'll get to later in this clip and also in future essays, which I'll also have accompanying clips for. A lot of these people are fucking losers. They don't understand what it means to feel the threat of the boot ready to kick you out of an institution. I mean, some of them are in college because they're kids, but many of them are fucking neats and happy to be so. So that's why they come online and like to LARP as Nazis and uh, ironic pedophiles, because they don't have anything to fear. But for those of us who are high earning, urban cosmopolitans, we felt that pressure of like, well, why would I open my mouth about anything because it'll just threaten my advancement through these lib dominated institutions or my workplace, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I wanted to start the essay off by saying, like, a lot of people get here because they feel that boot on their neck and they need some place to come and to reassure themselves that it's, like, in fact, not them who have gone insane, but actually it's a woke world gone mad out there. So before we even got into the essay, or before I even got into the essay, I wanted to say, right top line, what is the left? What do I mean by that? What am I anti when I say I'm anti the left? The left, and all of these words we'll get into. We got a minute, you know. Shout out to my producer for getting premium, so we got a minute to chill out and hang out. The left is a bonapartist, we'll get into it, bipartisan coalition that is funded by the tech, defense, pharma, and finance industries, right? It is a coalition funded by those industries and which constitutes professional managerial class urban cosmopolitans, right? Lawyers, doctors, teachers, whatever, professional managerial class, careers that which require a college degree. And lumpen proletariat, anti-left Marxism, lumpen proletariat non-productive sectors of the economy, including criminals, which we'll get into about, like, you know, George Soros, TM, DAs, release, catch and release type of things, lumpen proletariat criminal elements, and obviously migrants, right? Of course, those elements are, in a strictly Marxist sense, productive, right? But they are undercutting the indigenous working class of the country. They aren't able to fully participate in a formal economy, et cetera, et cetera. They are outside of the normal working class productive elements in society. So it's a coalition between mainly these two factions, the PMC cosmopolitans and those people who aspire to that, right? It doesn't matter if you're working class, if you're sending your kid to college in hopes that they're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or work for an NGO or some fucking bullshit like that. You're an aspirant there too, right? And this is a multiracial coalition of that PMC class. And then, of course, the criminals, the bums, the junkies, the prostitutes, the OnlyFans prostitutes, the migrants, illegal and legal, because obviously legalism is facade in terms of when we talk about Haitian migrants getting temporary protected status. Like, sure, they're legal, but only by way of legal fiction. Um, and those two constituent parts of the society, right, being in this coalition, get benefits doled out to them. Which we'll get into, right, in terms of legal protections, legal privileges, preferential hiring practices, um, and the faction of capital, the faction of industry, the tech, defense, pharma, finance, of course, gets benefited by funneling capital to themselves, securing government contracts, being rent seekers, et cetera, et cetera. Those two constituent parts are working in tandem in order to um, one, dominate every liberal institution, whether it's academia, whether it's the NGO nonprofit complex, whether it's the media, in order to punish the people outside of their coalition, which in terms of demographic is obviously coded as like normal, as in not having a sexual identity, white, as in not being able to take part of the racial identity spoil system, men, and also the industries that are outside of their coalition, right? So to think about that in terms of, well, when Obama was in office, all of that solar panel bullshit, right, is in direct contention with oil and gas. They're in direct tech, defense, pharma, finance doesn't really include oil and gas, doesn't include in domestic manufacturing. So the things that benefit those industries in the coalition often necessarily harm those industries outside of the coalition, right? Because that's the whole essence of Bonapartism is that these classes are not monoliths, right? It's a section of capitalism teaming up with a section of society in terms of PMC and lumpen in order to empower themselves, funnel money to themselves, while also simultaneously punishing their. And it's not just a vindictive type of punishment. I mean this in the sense that what triggers Bonapartism, whether it's the current type of Bonapartism that we're living through, or the Bonapartism of Marx's time, or the Bonapartism of the early 20th century, is some sort of economic crisis, economic political instability, right? So in 2008, when you have the financial crisis, what you have is the faction of capital, of finance capitals in particular, that is best poised to do so, tech, defense, pharma, finance, in which their interests are aligned, and they have many. There's a lot of overlap between them. The faction of capital that's best poised to do so will seize the reins of the state in order to stabilize the crisis that precipitated their seizure of power in such a way that they're the ones who benefit and the other one someone else is left holding the bag. In this case, it's a lot of domestic industry, manufacturing, oil and gas, etc., like I mentioned. That's the essence of Bonapartism, and that's why I call this a Bonapartist coalition. But it's important to remember that this coalition is actually bipartisan, right? And this is what I mean when I say I'm not a liberal, okay? You have to understand that the parties are fictions, right? That's why I call it political kayfabe. It's a it's left Marxism. It's a thin veneer over the dictatorship of capital. In this particular instance, a faction of capital, right? So when I say things like the GOP left, right, I mean that they're leftist in the sense that they're advancing the interests of this coalition that I just described: tech, defense, pharma, finance, PMCs, lumpen proletariat, but they're just doing it from the other bourgeois political party, right? And the examples that I use in this case are people like Mitch McConnell, people like Dan Crenshaw, people like Caitlyn Jenner, which we'll get into a little bit more later. Um, these people are leftists with an R next to their name. And this is why I get into the essay where I talk about rearguardism and vanguardism, because from the genesis of liberalism in the French Revolution, right, left and right, these directional terms for our politics come from the National Assembly, and the people sitting on the left being the progressive vanguard, the more radical sans-culottes and whatever, and the people on the right being the more maybe reactionary or conservative rear guard of this liberal advancement and in capital L liberalism, this liberal revolution. So what we see constantly in this dichotomy between the vanguard and the rear guard is the vanguard being the bleeding edge, pushing ever forward, right? And the rear guard in the moment putting up some sort of rhetorical protest, some sort of kayfabe, however, always losing. And then as the vanguard moves forward, right, to the next thing, it'll be the rear guard, which has been pulled forward, defending the gains of the previous iteration of the vanguard. And to illustrate this point, I used Title IX. Another great example of this is Nancy Mace. Okay. So 40, 50 years ago, when the progressive vanguard of liberalism was seeking to expand the Civil Rights Act, which we'll get into as not only a legal censorship regime, but also a patronage system for left loyalists, when the progressive vanguard was trying to expand the Civil Rights Act and to include Title IX, which protects, privileges women. TM in publicly funded higher institutions by forcing institutions which get public funding to have equal programs for women TM. And I guess we should take a second to understand why I use terms like women TM, gay TM, black TM, trans TM, because as I've said on New Right Post with Dudley New Right, when I use those terms, right, women TM, gay TM, trans TM, black TM, I'm not referring to females or people of foundational Black Americans, as Tariq Nasheed would say, or sodomites writ large, or people who cross-dress writ large. What I'm talking about is a legal fiction, an abstraction that is recognized and protected, read privileged, um, in the Civil Rights Act, right? So you could be a female, right? But it's only when you like Nancy Mace infiltrate the Citadel, which was at once an only men's institution on the basis of the Civil Rights Act in order to destroy this male only institution. You no longer are just a female, right? You're a woman TM. You're a political actor. You are, whether it's in the discourse or in the realm of like lawfare, you are now adopting a politicized identity, a legally recognized identity, in order to weaponize it against the left's enemies. So it's the same thing where this is the problem that people have with, of course, present company excluded, with like based gays and based blacks, TM, based women. It's because there's an implicit understanding that at any moment you can adopt that liberal legal fiction identity in order to police the discourse and punish people to your right when they say something that you don't like. So, for example, whenever a black TM take seller, right? No, so not just a foundational Black American person on the street, but a person who holds themselves out on the timeline as being based and Black, and the reason why they're you should listen to them is because they're saying it as a Black TM person. When that person eventually has, or brown person, when that person like Indian Bronson, for example, is confronted with too much racism for their own racism TM, for their own personal comfort, it automatically becomes for the black person, they'll say you're racist, right? For the Indian Bronson Browns, it'll be like, oh, well, guess what? You deserve to be replaced, or your kids will be trans, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and in all those instances, what you're seeing is a person choosing to pick up a weapon that's laid out for them by the left and attack their left's enemies for them, for their own advancement through the media, for the media career, for their media career, or through liberal institutions, right? This is why you have the phenomenon of commie hijabis, where you have first generation American born Arabs and Muslims, putting on a hijab in order to, advocate for trans rights for Palestinians, because it's all one thing, TM. What they're doing is, by putting on that hijab or adopting a Muslim TM identity, they are advancing themselves through liberal institutions by acting as a foot soldier for this political coalition which controls these institutions. Um, so again, this is bonapartism that we were talking about. This is a TM identities that we're talking about as it relates to the Civil Rights Act, as it relates to a censorship regime, a patronage regime. And I want to talk a little bit more um, about this GOP left thing, right? So again, if we think about the GOP left as being nominally a Republican, normie cons have a term for this too. It's called a rhino, right? But because they don't have a concrete understanding of what the left is. They say Republican in name only. They're not a real Republican. To be a Republican means to be anti-left, but we know that's not true, right? And I think a really good example, as that we're seeing right now, and that we'll continue to see over the next 2 years, as plans are laid out for the ascension of Fuhrer Vance, who's really going to do it, you guys. He's going to deport his own wife. Don't, be sure to subscribe to Caribbean Rhythms to tell, so he can tell you how that's going to happen. What we're going to continue to see is that with this ascendancy of the tech-funded dissident right, the Andreessen Teal-funded Bronze Age Barry Weiss faction of the dissident media market, what we're seeing really is just a kind of reshuffling of the exact same coalition. Because as I've been telling you since 2020, before the real ascendancy of this tech faction, that it's always been tech, defense, pharma, finance, right? And again, the parties are fiction. So what we're really seeing, even when we see Mark Zuckerberg talking about how he's going to change the terms of service, what we're seeing is uh, a change in rhetoric, a change in branding, but we're not seeing any, of course, the change in their material interests. There's been no change in their material interests. So as they, so first, what I'll say is what we're seeing with the ascendancy of the tech dissidents are a kind of reshuffling. So instead of, as we've seen with the ascendancy of previous to Barack Obama, but the Obama presidency really was the shining apex of this, the ascendancy of finance, right, in this tech to pharma finance coalition, where it's like finance is driving the blue car. What we're seeing in this moment is a kind of reshuffling where tech is kind of trying to assert itself and drive the red car in order to push itself forward. And how I've been describing this is that it's a type of vanguardism from within the rear guard. So what we have is, you know, just a couple examples to put in your mind. Brian Johnson, Moonbra guy, right? The biohackers. When we're talking about Curtis Yarvin, when we're talking about these Silicon Valley transhumanists, right? A lot of what they've been doing for the past 20 years, right, has been collecting funding on the premise that like AI is about to just completely change the world, right? Or depending on the time scale of their branding, it'll be like, AI and large language models, or some people will be like, oh, we're gonna live forever, biohacking, we're gonna upload ourselves to the cloud, these types of things. And by constantly branding themselves as these things just being just around the corner, they have been able to raise a lot of capital in order to advance this. And what we see is with the influx of these tech billionaires, Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, etc., is that they're all in ideological lockstep when it comes to pushing forward this type of transhumanist agenda. Whether they actually believe that they can upload themselves to the cloud or whatever bullshit they try to sell you doesn't really fucking matter. What matters is the fact that they have been and will continue to be able to raise money on by selling people on the idea that this is possible. And that's why I've said recently the TQ is not just about cross-dressers and the expansion of the Civil Rights Act in order to include gender identity expression. Those are like the legalistic aspects of it, right? There's a broader metaphysical question where it's about the transhumanist question, and it's about whether you really think that it is even possible to upload oneself to the cloud, right? Whether you believe there is something unique about human creation, the human creature. And I guess this is why some social conservatives talk about the necessity of defining the right wing or the anti-left or whatever it may be in terms of belief in God. However, I often find that many of the people who profess a belief in God just do so as as a means of like edgy branding themselves. Of course, I don't hold myself out as like a Muslim take seller for that reason. Uh, but I think it gets to that same question where it's like, do you believe that there's something unique and important about the human soul such that would preclude the premise that we could upload ourselves and live forever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what we see is with a lot of these people in this tech faction of the dissident right is that they do believe this, right? And what we're seeing is, and a perfect example of this is like the reason why they don't want to address the TQ is because not because they are such tranny lovers. I mean, many of them are. Uh, but it's because they kind of want to power through this awkward cringe stage of the gender goblin because it's just a stepping stone to what they've been trying to sell for the past couple of years, decade or so more. Uh, of transhumanism, of biohacking, of uploading themselves to the cloud, of getting the chip in your fucking brain that's going to fry you when you say something that's a little too racist online. And I think a perfect example of this is actually really important to get on the record is Caitlyn Jenner. There's been a lot of talk and chatter of Caitlyn Jenner running for governor of California. And this dovetails with 2 points, right? With as we've been talking about the ascendancy of the tech faction of the dissident right and being a vanguard within the rear guard and being like crypto leftist transhumanists. And there's the other aspect of it of the TQ as litmus test. So before we get back to talking about Caitlyn Jenner's governorship run, let's talk about a little bit about the TQ as a litmus test as it relates to the censorship regime. One fucking retard tried to ask me in the DMs recently, he's like, "What, you think you're the first person to hate trannies?" I'm like, "Bitch, first of all, I am be like, do I think I'm the first person to talk about the TQ in terms of fucking the censorship regime and as a litmus test? Absolutely, I do. Nobody was talking about it in these terms prior to 2020, and every single one of you were fucking downstream for me. But that being said, I'm trying to be serious here. But let's talk about the TQ in terms of censorship and this censorship regime and the patronage regime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What we have to understand is that with the left, right? As we talk about the boot on our neck, right? That triggers people to come and become disaffected and come to the media market online, et cetera, become dissidents, whatever it may be. It's all one thing, TM. Everything that you can point to that we correctly react to are all just different manifestations of different connections between tech, defense, pharma, finance, and their patrons and their foot soldiers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So whether it's mass immigration, which obviously the anti-left position is to support mass deportations, um, or whether it's reaction to vaccine mandates and vaccine passports, or whether it's a reaction to our constant our war in Ukraine, the war in Afghanistan, the wars in the Middle East, it's or whether it's the trans question. These are all different manifestations of the exact same political coalition. It's all one thing. And I use in the essay a couple of examples. I use like that guy who would cross dress with a blonde wig being a spokesperson for the Azov battalion or whatever the fuck it was. I use an example of an NGO, I believe it's in Canada, that would resettle specifically LGBT TM Afghan refugees. There is no such thing as an Afghan refugee after 2021 when the Taliban liberated the
Sexism,
country.
racism,
Jane
misogyny,
Fonda.
homophobia, whatever, the war. And if you really get into it, everything's connected. There'd be no climate crisis if it wasn't for racism.
The charge d'affaires to Afghanistan, saying that maybe Afghan girls just need a little bit of black girl magic, that type of thing. Trannies for Palestine, all of these things. Um, all of these things are not only manifestations of the coalition, right? But they all serve a function for the coalition. So they're all fundamentally function to either funnel money from the American taxpayer to one of these industries, whether it's the defense industry, right? So Ukraine or Afghanistan, a lot of the money that goes to those places doesn't actually go to those fucking places. It gets laundered in those places to go back to the defense contractors, pharmaceutical industry, right? Obviously with the vaccine, or with gay TM people, men with sexual identities who go out of their way to defend not only the use of PrEP but to defend its coverage under insurance plans, is a transfer of wealth from insurance people who have insurance policies who pay premiums to the pharmaceutical industry in order to benefit one of their foot soldiers, men with sexual identities who are on PrEP, okay? Or including quote unquote gender affirming care under these same policies. It's a way of funneling money to the benefactors in benefit of the foot soldiers. And in kind of in return, not only do they get those benefits, but by adopting those identities, which are the mechanism for these transfers, those foot soldiers get to actually make use of the Civil Rights Act as a weapon against the people outside of this coalition, right? So when we talk about hostile work environments under Title 7 of Title 6 or 7, who fucking knows? You get my point, of the Civil Rights Act. That's why you have, a cross-dresser is able to hold everyone in an office hostage and able to play act their fetish, and no one can say anything. It's the reason why you're afraid of let it be known that you voted for Trump in front of the black TM coworker who could hold herself out as who could deputize herself as the arbiter of what is and isn't racism, and therefore weaponize an HR department to against you, right? The HR department, just like the online terms of service or university Title IX office, exists to conform that institution to the Civil Rights Act in order to make sure that they're within the bounds of the law. The Civil Rights Act, which is ever expanding. I take the position of Ayn Rand. I take the position of what's her fucking name? Oh my God, Ann Coulter, when it comes to the Civil Rights Act, right? Where I say, even if you take as a premise that the Civil Rights Act was legitimate in terms of addressing the legacy of Jim Crow and racism and slavery, et cetera, when it was passed, there was no logical reason for it to expand to all racial minorities, then all women, then people with sexual identities, and now people with gender identities. And in all of these cases, is an expansion of the Civil Rights Act, right? And if we understand the Civil Rights Act as a patronage censorship system, then we understand that these are all expansions of that same censorship patronage system to not only um, limit the range of discourse that people outside of this coalition can have, but to further create different constituencies of foot soldiers. So when you expand it to from just black TM Americans to all racial minorities, and well, all racial minorities by being POC TM or brown TM can then weaponize it in the same way. Just as with like Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the 60s and or the 70s, I guess, expanding it to include women TM, like Nancy Mace took advantage of to in order to attend Citadel. And then, of course, when we had like the expansion on the basis of sexual orientations, when we have like, the gay TM George Floyd of Matthew Shepard or Ellen coming out and all these things. And when we were talking about a gay gene, right? Discussions such as the gay gene and whether one is born this way are type of rhetorical red herrings to keep the populace kind of on a hamster wheel while the legal process is working its way through in order to solidify this expansion. As soon as the expansion is solidified, that shit's dropped like a hot potato because no one actually gives a fuck if anyone's born this way. The point was to get the Civil Rights Act expanded to include sexual orientation. So what we then have, and we see exact, but this is the distinction, right? Women's inclusion in public life is not in political contention. That battle's lost. Even the fucking gay shit you lost, right? Everyone has gay friends, right? When you see someone to take someone being like Basil's gay and Basil's brown, that's a moment for you, audience member, to decide whether you're going to be lost in the sauce or not, right? Because me being brown, me being brown, and me being gay, I'm celibate, only matter within this, play box of the media market, this media market microcosm sandbox where you're all expected to come here and have it be a holding container for you, where you're kept on a hamster wheel of like, oh, we're really going to do TND and we're really going to send them back. And meanwhile, all you're really doing is funneling your attention and your clicks and your likes and your money as key performance indicators, KPIs, for your favorite take seller, who's then going to use all of the stuff that you anons create to sell it back to you and stab you in the back by putting it in the mouth of like a Bronze Age tranny or a based black or whatever. um that's a moment for you to realize, be like, oh, right, that only matters here. In the real world, the fact that I'm brown and the fact that I'm gay is the reason why I'm able to say things that white men get pilloried for, right? That white men, if they said half of what I say, would be already dragged into an HR office. I get to turn it up and cow and be like, oh, I don't know what you are talking about, and be able to weaponize these things for good in the way that I see it, and being the goal being to salt the earth of the coalition that me to get the jab and wants to flood the country with migrants and wants to trans people's kids, right? It's a moment for you, audience member, to decide whether you're going to be lost in the sauce. But to get back to what I was saying, with the Nancy Mace, all these expansions, right? Woman TM, gay TM, now trans TM. This is why I talk about the TQ as a political litmus test and dividing line. What's great is, oh, right, and the point that I was making was like, you already lost on the fucking gay issue, right? Everyone has gay friends. By conflating, right, gays and trans, you're actually helping the left, because you already lost on the gay question. No one really wants to fight that anymore. But the trans question is so ridiculous and absurd on its face. I don't give a fuck what the fuck you people LARPing as social conservatives and trads or whatever say. We're living in the real world here. You're actually helping the trans thing by giving it all the bona fides of the already lost fight, right? But right now, when we're talking about the trans question being in political contention, Bostock was just ruled on a couple of years ago, which incorporated into the Civil Rights Act gender identity and expression, therefore forcing every institution with an HR department or a Title IX office or an online terms of service to comply with and conform with the Civil Rights Act, such that would make it further censored to talk about the trans question. And the reason why the trans question is so important is because, just like we've been talking about, it's all one thing. All of these nodes, whether it's Ukraine or, the jab or migrants or the trans question or the whatever, are all interconnected nodes of the left's project. The trans question is so absurd on its face that it becomes an Achilles heel for the left. All of these other different nodes, whether it's immigration, whether it's Ukraine, whatever, are subject to the COVID thing, are subject to experts, which can step into the discourse in order to mystify apolitical people or politicized midwits in order to give them justification to, or just to muddy the waters, right? You could have an expert come in, right? If your position is, you're an apolitical person, you see that the country's demographics are changing, whatever, whatever, whatever. There's a credentialed expert TM, which comes through academia, right? Because they have the credentials to come in and say, well, actually, the line goes up. Oh, it's improving the GDP. Oh, we could cook some statistics and say, actually, migrants do less crime. LOL. Um, all of these things. And even then, you could even have someone who says, I agree with all of your takes, right? The crime, the displacement, the depression of wages for indigenous workers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and still say, whatever, I value having Ethiopian slop available. Okay. There you go. That whole question's off the table. Then you have, like, the climate thing, the COVID thing. You have experts who can do the exact same thing. With even when it comes to race things, it still matters to normies to be called racist. And if any person with a racial identity can be deputized in order to declare to be the arbiter of what is and isn't racist, well, I'm sorry, unless the person's already as deeply internet, brain rotted as you are, it matters to them to be called racist. Why would you engage in that ball of wax? The TQ is different. There is no expert, not the American Medical Association, not the American Psychiatric Association. No cross-dresser can deputize themselves in the same way that a racial minority can to declare as an arbiter that such things are verboten for being transphobic. TM. It is an absurdity on its face such that no expert can actually convince you or any normal person that men can actually give birth, right? Or that it's good to put men in women's prisons, for example, or to teach people's kids in public schools that they could be born in the wrong body, therefore putting them on a path of confusion, medicalization, sterilization, butchery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And unlike the thing where it's like the person is, you're like, okay, accepting all that is true, I still think it's good to have, I just, I have such an outgroup preference that I prefer it. No rational person will say that it's good to put men in women's prisons or whatever. All they could do is, like, the take sellers, the foot soldiers, etc., can do, like, why do you care? That literally never happens. I just don't think about that, right? But if you just, like, take a second of being like a serious person for a second, and you just, like, oh, well, this is actually why it matters. It matters because it's connected to the Civil Rights Act. It's connected to all of these things that we're all reacting against. But however, this is its Achilles heel. This is the most absurd thing on its face. And it's so important. It's impossible to understate just how important it is and powerful it is to get either an apolitical person or whatever to say, I don't care what the experts say. Actually, I know enough on my own to know what up is and what down is, what left is and what right is. I know that a man can't be a woman. I know we shouldn't be putting men in women's prisons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it has this other beautiful aspect to it where, unlike much of the low IQ transphobia, to borrow a term from low IQ anti-Semitism, it's not about, like, ew, fucking gender goblins and the cross-dressers and blah, blah, blah. I'm a sophisticated cosmopolitan. I don't give a fuck who you fuck. I don't give a fuck how you dress, whatever. It's not about those people. It's not about your cool trans friend. Cross dress all you fucking want. We're not going to allow you to change, for example, this is the reason I use this example, to change your license from male to female. Because a world that allows you to do that, a legal system that allows you to do that, already presupposes that there is something that is able to be legally recognized to justify that change. And the whole point of the TQ from the left's perspective is to include gender identity and expression in the law. This is why so many of the normie cons uh end up taking a crypto leftist position, acting as rearguardists by saying, whoa, 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 trans kids, that's insane. But that has nothing to do with my cool trans friend who just wants to be left alone. Doesn't matter. The left is very happy to forego childhood transitions so long as gender identity and expression is included in the Civil Rights Act. Because once they're 18, they're able to then adopt that identity marker and weaponize in the same way that women TM, black TM, gay TM are able to do it. They don't give a fuck about actually, like, oh no, we gotta get them when they're 12. The only reason that they fucking do that is because they want a future where you associate trans TM with, like, the hot trannies, Brazilian and Thai trannies that you want to fuck, as opposed to, like, GameStop. It's ma'am, trannies, right? Because it'll make it easier. Because what we see with like the type of barstool sports type of conservative is like they're just crypto leftists. They hate the excesses, but they always reify the premises. That's why Dave Portnoy will jump onto the timeline in order to punch right in response to the Dobbs decision, because he's a perpetual adolescent, like all barstool sports conservatives are. They're just perpetual adolescents who want to live as 16-year-olds until they're 50 and make sure that the hoes that they get pregnant can get abortions, right? But it's about not just critiquing the excesses and reifying the premises. It's about rejecting the premises wholesale, pulling out the root and stem. And that's what's so beautiful about the TQ, and as opposed to the racial discourse, right? The racial discourse is tied up with all of these. It's a ball of wax where you, to the normie's mind, to the liberal's mind, you have to separate out the type of anti-white discrimination and the racial preferential hiring, et cetera, from the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and blah 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 blah. The TQ is great. You don't have to do any of that. It's reject it root and stem, and because it's all one thing and it's all interconnected, it gets right to the root of this cosmopolitan coalition, of this Bonapartist coalition. And we'll say, with this already gone on too long, so we'll wrap it up a little bit, which is to say why it's Basil gets canceled from the dissident right for transphobia. Let's get back to Caitlyn Jenner real quick. Caitlyn Jenner is critiquing the excesses of reifying the premises personified. There's a clip, I'll post it now, of him boasting to trans kids, be like, "You're winning. Don't worry about the bullies. All right, you're winning."
I have a message for the trans kids of America. You're winning. I know it doesn't feel like it today or every day, but you're winning. Very soon we will win full freedom nationwide, and it's going to be with bipartisan support. You can help by checking out the National Center for Transgender Equality and letting Washington hear you loud and clear. Now I have a message for the bullies. You're sick. And because you're weak, you pick on kids, you pick on women, or anyone else you think is vulnerable. Apparently, even becoming the Attorney General isn't enough to cure some people of their insecurities. As proof, the Supreme Court will soon hear a very important Title IX case, thanks to the courage of a very brave young man, Gavin Grimm. Mr. President, we'll see you in court. Finally, I have a message for President Trump from, well, one Republican to another. This is a disaster, and you can still fix it. You made a promise to protect the LGBTQ community. Call me.
You see the photo with Caitlyn Jenner, Elon Musk, Donald Trump. Okay, this is the base transsexual. This is the dissonant rhetorical sleight of hand from gender goblin to base transsexual, the Bronze Age Blair White, whatever. The, oh, don't trans the kids, but my cool trans friend is completely fine. If and when Caitlyn Jenner runs for governor, say it's against Gavin Newsom, Gavin Newsom would be the anti-left choice, because by solidifying, right, reifying that excess critiquing, premise reifying position of saying Caitlyn Jenner is a woman, our first female governor, you have advanced and solidified and shored up the gains of the vanguard. Okay. And that's exactly why you're going to see that happen. I think we'll see. I haven't missed yet. We'll see if I miss. But yeah, it's important to keep that in mind. But I think, I think we pretty much got everything. But yeah, so as we go forward, I mean, tonight I'll start writing a piece about their religion is brown, TM, about Muslims and how Muslims play into this leftist thing, using the whole hojabis for Palestine as a example. But going forward, we're going to do a lot more. We're going to have an essay specifically about Bonapartism, and I wanted to touch on this real quick. Is yes, I understand Germany didn't go to total war economy until later, and I didn't want to do fucking research, okay? But I will do a full essay on Bonapartism where I flesh out this connection. It's really important to the whole Basilian anti-leftism to really flesh out that connection between Louis Napoleon, you know, Germany in the early 20th century, and the current Bonapartist left coalition. And so we'll do one on bonapartism. We'll do one more. We'll do another one on the TQ as a litmus test and why that's so important, and kind of give you guys like the rhetorical tools to kind of do that kayfabe. I'm sorry, to do that kind of like discourse. We'll do a bunch more. We'll do critiquing the excesses, reifying the premises. We'll of course do the race play take, a whole bunch of stuff. But I think this is a good first episode, my first solo really. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed this essay. I hope you guys enjoyed the next couple of them.
This is Bareback Trian.
Until then, see you later.